Hello everyone, 1212. Is this working? Hey, testing. Let me know if this is working, guys. It should be working. All right. Nice, it's working perfect. Okay, well I can put this screen on the top screen so I can still see your comments. And guys, I guess we're gonna get started then. It's been a while. By the way, you can still send more tracks if you want. I think I have like 16 or 17 tracks, but it depends how fast I review them. I could potentially do more. So if you have any more tracks that you want to send, my email is in the description. I might or might not be able to review them. I think I'm gonna stream for like 1 or 2 hours, so yeah. Okay, so we're gonna start with this track by Everetic, which is called The Hero's End. Let me just make sure that my voice is not too loud compared to the... Actually... That's loud. Wait. I'm gonna kind of rebalance everything, I think. Okay, if I turn myself up a little bit. And the music down. Okay, like that. Okay, so we're just gonna stop there for a bit. Let's just talk about this intro part here. So I like how the sound is like warm but airy at the same time. So it sounds like you have lots of low mids and lots of air. But I think there is kind of a missed opportunity of filling the high mids with a bit more stuff. So what I might have done here is make sure that the choir is actually more high mid heavy. Because you have lots of horns here around the 500 Hz range. And you have lots of air from like the violins and everything. But it's just kind of dug here too much. But choirs naturally have a lot of these frequencies, around 2-3K, so you could let the choir breathe a bit more around here and cut a bit more. You know, the natural kind of harsh frequencies of the choir, sometimes they're fine, and you just don't have quite enough of these high mids, so it kind of feels like the overall intro is a bit too focused around the low mids. And I would actually control the instruments a bit more here. I think the brass definitely might be a little bit too dark here. This sounds nice though, overall. Very chill. Okay, so regarding the oboe melody, so this particular library sounds like it needs a bit more compression or at least dynamic EQ. Because you got the oboe that's a bit too inconsistent. For example, here it's kind of consistent and then you got a very loud note here, like a very nasal note. You can even see it in the waveform, how nasal it is due to the increase in size here. And what happens is that sometimes, especially around this part here, like certain notes get buried too much and other notes are loud and a bit too nasal. So you could do like a bit of full range compression and also some dynamic EQ to sort of control the oboe more and have it more streamlined with the rest of the instruments. So for example, this nasal resonance, you could like dynamic EQ it, just so that it's less shocking when it happens. Like these tonal differences from note to note are normal and you can't just obliterate them, but sometimes they're too much and they need to be tamed a little bit so that the performance is not as distracting. But it's not just tonal balance issues with the oboe, it's just volume issues as well. It's just too inconsistent, so I think a bit of overall compression or parallel compression, nothing with too high of a ratio, maybe just like an LA2A or something, you know, just to sort of reduce the dynamic range of the oboe first, and then some dynamic EQ would make it more pleasing and consistent throughout this part. But guys, don't hesitate if you have any questions about anything I'm saying, even if it's not your track, just go ahead. And that's not really mixing stuff, but also regarding the phrasing of the oboe. It sounds like you're doing a bit too much detours, in my opinion. Like the melody is a bit hard to follow because you're making it a bit too complex compared to what it needs to be, I think. I don't think it needs to have this many notes. So it gets a little bit confusing in my opinion around here. Also the oboe is just a bit too narrow. It almost sounds a bit too mono, so I would probably just spread it a tiny bit. So to spread it cleanly, you don't have to use a stereo enhancer. You could just use like a reverb like an SP 2016 to add a bit more natural room around the sound. See how it's affecting the stereo image? So maybe a tiny bit more of this would make it a bit more roomy and realistic as well, without having too much of a long tail. So a very short reverb. I don't know if I forgot to turn down the tail here, but the idea is to have a short room. You make sure there is not too much tail. And you create early reflections, which will sort of widen the sound, as well as add a bit of depth. So a short room reverb will do, actually. Okay, let's go to the next part here. So for this part, what I could say is regarding the melody, it's kind of the same thing. You don't have to do like the same pattern all the way through, like dun, 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 dun. Like otherwise it becomes too predictable. So you could vary up the rhythmic element of the melody, the phrasing element a bit more, so that it's less predictable. And here we're also lacking a lot of bass. It's very mid-rangey, but the bass range is very lacking. So this kind of illustrates what I'm hearing. Like you got all these low mids and stuff, which are fine, but it's very much lacking bass here. So let's figure out if it's composition or mixing. I mean, you don't have bass instruments, but you have high violins, you have lots of mid-range instruments. I think you could have like a timpani, for example, to do some support notes. Like some low timpani notes could just add that bass support. Also, just stronger double basses overall. And you could have, on top of the timpani, you could even have a bass drum, like every 4 bars or something, to sort of accent that. And it would just kind of fill the bass range and make the track a lot more beefy sounding. Because what's going on here is like the intro of the track, for example, this part here, is actually more balanced tonally than this main part. So you got a part that's louder, but that's less tonally balanced. So this one is more kind of just mid-range. But here, even though it's quieter, it's actually deeper sounding because you have a better bass to mids ratio, if that makes sense. So here you really need to consider what instruments you need to put to support all these louder mid-range instruments. And also, of course, balance them out compared to the mid-range instruments. But the EQ of the highs is actually quite nice. Like, I can't say a lot of bad stuff about the high end of the strings. Here it sounds great. You know, it's mostly like balancing the bass with the mids. The violins do sound very good. The violins are pretty much perfect high end from the violins. So I think here the same thing that I was talking about with the oboe and the stereo field could be applied. The flute is a bit narrow sounding. Like it's almost mono, almost like recorded too much by just one mic. So if you can widen that somehow. Then maybe under this final part here, maybe you could have a deeper double bass. Now it doesn't have to be deeper, but you know, the intro is not that bassy either, but maybe you could have like more kind of growling double, like legato kind of arcs of double basses under these chords, just to sort of support the chords in the bass as well. That could be nice. Just to create kind of a deeper swelling feel, you know. I mean, I don't know if I can simulate that with the EQ. I mean, it's kind of lacking, you know, in my opinion, a very low kind of bass note, but that's also kind of a taste thing because you don't need that growling bass, but it could be nice, especially if it's growing throughout the intro, because it's a little bit long here. You could potentially just have it light at the beginning and then introduce a low arcs of bass and chili an octave apart to sort of support the choir. And at the very ending here, I think you need to balance out the voices. It feels a bit strange, a bit, I would say, wrong, I mean, in quotes, because you have that and the harmony is not quite balanced. You have this one lead here. And there's one of the notes sounds a bit strange as well, but if it's intentional, I think to make it blend better, you could have like kind of a better balance in the harmony. So less of that one lead, and just more of that third below and the bass line, you know, just to sort of complete the chord more and to make the final chord more full sounding as well. Because right now it feels a bit like it's slightly unbalanced, which makes it a bit incomplete feeling in terms of the harmony. But the choir is very cool. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, I guess, for this track. But yeah, overall, very nice. Just balance things, to balance things, as I said. I mean, the width of the woodwinds is not as critical as the tonal balance. I mean, try to pay attention to the tonal balance before that. That's just kind of ear candy. But it would be nice to have the winds a bit wider as well. Anyway, cool track. Guys, let's move on to the next one. So, what do I have next? I have by Derek Shire, A Runner Suite. Alright, let's see. Oh, 17 viewers, cool. And during the football finals. Okay, let's see this track. Okay, I have an idea of the mix. It sounds very good. Now, I think we could tweak a few things. So let's start with the intro. So here you got a flute. That flute is doesn't feel like it belongs in the mix because it's very narrow and dry. And the rest of the track just, doesn't sound like that. So I think it's too much of a contrast to have a flute that's like almost completely mono like that. So I think the thing I was talking about with the previous track, you could put a reverb like SP2016 or a room just to add transparent width to the sound. Just that the flute is not completely mono in the center because it feels like it doesn't have any space, So it feels like it doesn't, like it's not part of the room. So to make it part of the room, the best trick in my opinion for mono recordings like that is to put a room reverb, a short reverb, around like, I don't know, this amount of milliseconds here, not too much. And then you add a whole reverb afterwards, just to sort of add more tail, but also add this first layer of width so that it blends better. So that could address this flute. I think even if it needs to sound intimate, a tiny amount of room just makes it feel more realistic than a completely mono recording. Because in a real space, you would never get a completely mono recording or something that's too narrow. There is a point, when it's so narrow that it doesn't feel like it's in front of you. It feels like it's actually like a one mic recording, and it kind of breaks the immersion, in my opinion. Okay. So the strings sound very good here. So the one thing I was wondering about is the bass. So the low strings in general are a bit shy. I feel like the low strings could growl a bit more because everything is a bit soft. And just try to boost your cello and basses around like 4 or 5K. Not the violins, just the basses and cello. And maybe turn them up 1 dB, you know, just to get that low bass line to be a bit more present here. And a bit more characterful, because the high strings are very soft and lush. So the low basses could just be a bit more supportive and characterful, I think. So now here with the brass, because this gets quite dense, I think you can be a bit more aggressive with the brass EQ, especially the trumpet EQ. I mean... just for the extra clarity in the short notes, you can reference, you could reference, what is that? Yeah, solo, Star Wars Solo, Reminiscence Therapy. It's called Reminiscence Therapy. It's mixed by Sean Murphy, and he always does like really kind of aggressive trumpets. So I think because this is quite a glorious, fast, double-tongue trumpet type of track, you can go ahead and make it a bit more hyped for the brass, just so it cuts clearer through the choir and everything. But yeah, it does sound good. The orchestration is very nice around here. It's very cool movements. So I think it's a bit boxy in the percussion. Like here, for your percussion right here. I think you could cut it around. Just so that it's a bit, you know, a bit more hyped feeling, a bit less like there is a blanket in front of the percussion. And to do that, you need to cut around here. And of course, if I do that on the whole mix, it won't sound very good, but just the percussion should feel a bit more powerful, and it should mask less of the other instrument as well, because right now, the mids from the percussion here are sort of masking the more tonal elements in the track, and it kind of blurs them a little bit. So to get the percussion aggressive, but not to mask the other elements too much, you can cut it around here. Yeah, the brass feels a bit too tame here. You can go ahead and make sure it's a bit more hyped. I think the lows could be a tiny bit bigger as well, at the low end. And the choir sounds nice, but I feel like the choir could be EQ'd more as well. It's sort of clouding the mid-range a little bit too much around 1K, so make sure you dig the choir a bit more, so everything is more clear. So the thing with like dense tracks, it's like the more dense a track is, the more you kind of need to cut in order to get the clarity. So, you know, if you have like a very soft track with only a few elements, mostly strings, then you don't need to cut as much. But for when something is very dense, you should probably cut more to just be able to hear everything and actually keep like a flat frequency response. Otherwise it quickly clutters around here, like 1K-ish. Yeah, see the accents in the lows in the bass could be stronger here, just to support all the mid-range. A little bit, not too much, there is some bass, just a bit more low end could be fine. And just in general, the libraries sound a bit close, like the strings and the brass in general feel like a bit close. But that could be just the libraries. Sometimes there is not much you can do to make the libraries feel like they're recorded in a bigger hall. But I feel like the track would benefit from like libraries like orchestral tools that are recorded in a big hall, because it would sound even more glorious. Now, to get that sound, first what you can do is make sure that you don't have too much close mic in your libraries. And next, if you're already not having a lot of close mics, and you want to make the library sound bigger, you can use the doubler trick. So if you check my video on YouTube, which is called the strings bass depth trick, strings bass depth trick, you can apply it to strings and brass. And the idea is just to use a doubler to create like a sort of stereo slap delay. Like, I mean, I explain it in the video. It's a bit more complicated than a simple stereo slap, but it can make the room feel bigger. So you put this on the basses before the reverb sends. Like on your strings bass as an insert, you put the doubler, and it can make the sound feel more distant. Of course, if you go too far, it sounds like a mess, but you know, you can try this to sort of how would you say that, to boost the size of your libraries. Okay. That's about it for this one. So guys, let's check the track number 3. Okay. So, you can get SP2016 on sale though, for a lot less. But yeah, otherwise it's expensive. But I think sometimes it's like $30 just for Black Friday. Like it goes down very low. Okay, so we got Abend's Music, Sea of Stars. I'm gonna try to be a bit faster as well because I can review more tracks, because I realize it's already been like 30 minutes. So guys, I'm gonna try to be a bit faster on each track so I can review all the tracks. Okay, that sounds cool. That sounds cool, but I think because it's quite a minimal arrangement, you need to focus on polishing the stereo field. So right now you got a piano and like some atmospheric sound as well, but they're just kind of narrow. Like if you take what's behind the piano here, I think that needs to be very wide, because the piano is wide, you know, but it's not like extremely wide. So what I would do personally for this kind of ambient track is make sure it's extremely wide. So the piano I would just kind of leave like that, but then these background sounds I would like maybe put the Hass effect on them. The Hass effect is just like delaying one of the stereo channels by a few milliseconds. So like, for example, you delay like 7 milliseconds the left channel, and you know, it creates a very weird, like a kind of like an unrealistically wide sound, but this can be nice on some elements, and usually it sounds nice on little synth and background stuff like that. So you could just put the Hass effect on that background sound effect to have a very wide sound stage behind the piano. Now the strings here, I felt like they might have been a bit stereo enhanced. They sound a bit too wide. So I don't really like the width that is created by stereo enhancers, because it can usually sound a bit fake and like kind of reduce the 3D-ness of the strings. That's why I'm not a fan of of most stereo enhancers, because usually they just kind of like, you gain width, sure, but you also lose in depth with them. So maybe if you use the stereo enhancer on the ensemble strings here, reduce it. It could also be that you pan them too much. and therefore they sound a bit isolated. Like for example, the cello might sound a bit too isolated on the right here. And you don't have a lot of reverb, so they sound a bit narrow, isolated. So it's a bit like you have the cello sort of narrow, mono-ish, kind of by themselves on the right. So it doesn't sound too coherent. So I would be a bit more careful with the panning of the ensemble strings. So in terms of tonal balance, it does sound a bit cluttered sometimes. The lead violin is a bit dry as well. I would probably make it a bit wetter with a whole reverb. Or maybe it's a viola, I'm not sure. In terms of frequency response, I think you could have more bass to support the rest. It sounds a bit cluttered in the mids around... there. So make sure you could have like a kind of a warm bass going on. I think it could be nice. And also compress the lead instrument here, because sometimes it's resonating and sometimes it resonates more on certain notes. And it makes the track feel a bit cluttered. But it sounds nice though, but I think you should control it so it's not poking too much sometimes. And clouding the whole mix. And even if you don't want to add a lower octave of strings, which is understandable, in terms of mix, you could at least raise the current lowest bass line you have. Just in order to sort of balance out all that mid-range, you know? I mean, check out the difference already with the EQ on and off. You know, so that could make a good difference. But yeah, I like it though. It's quite minimalistic, but clean. Okay. Let's check out the next one. Well, we got... we got... Oh wait, I need to convert this, I think. Let me read the comments a bit. Cool, glad you like the feedback. Alright, great. Let's keep going then, guys. Oh, that's a Cubase export. So sometimes when you use Cubase to bounce tracks, like for some reason Pro Tools wants to split in dual mono, which is very strange, but that's what Pro Tools does, you know? Oh my god. It's okay. It's a bit loud. Just checking the volume. Good bass here, see? It's a good kind of satisfying amount of bass. this one is a bit trickier to analyze. I'm gonna start with the vocals. So, so I think the vocals are a bit too wide, a bit too, I would say, like they have too much early reflections. So some libraries, I think like Jaeger has a vocal like that. It's already very wet, kind of. And it's not like wet with tail, it's kind of wet with room feel, you know? So it's very, very roomy. Like you had a ton of short reverb on it. And I think it's a bit too much. It kind of doesn't blend with the rest because it's just so roomy, it sounds almost fake in terms of space. So I think what you can do if it's already stuck like that, you can just narrow it with a stereo enhancer. You can just narrow it to reuse the effect almost of the doubler that's kind of built in. But if you're the one who put this effect, just cut it by half or something to make the vocal a bit more mono, a bit more focused sounding. Because I think right now it just feels like it's in its own little bubble space. It sounds good, but it just feels kind of out of the mix, even though it sounds nice. You know, by itself it would sound nice, but with the rest of the mix, it doesn't sound too coherent, I think. The rest sounds good though. I mean, the tonal balance here is quite good. Doesn't have to be too bassy, so I like the tonal balance here. Maybe just the low mids are slightly bloated, maybe with the horns. Let's see. Yeah, the brass is just maybe slightly honky. Slightly. Wait, let me change something, guys. Wait, I just realized I lowered the master 9 dB as well. I hope I didn't just lower all the stream 9 dB. It's because I had the old group selected. Anyway. Let me know if the whole stream became too quiet, guys. Anyway, yeah, it's just slightly bloated here, I think, in the low mids around... Let me actually create a bass because this is too complicated. Because it's on 2 tracks now. Okay. Yeah, let me just go back to... Okay, sorry. Sorry for the volume jump, guys. It should be better like that. Okay. So around here, it's a bit bloated feeling. So check out the brass. Yeah, I didn't notice, guys, because I have my volume knob all the time, so I can turn it at will. When I was turning down the track here, I just turned down the master as well. Well, it's fixed now. Okay. So yeah, you could open up the mix a bit by cutting here. Now, regarding the ending, it's just kind of a general trend as the track builds up. So as it builds up towards the end of the build-up, I feel like it just kind of becomes more unbalanced because you got the mid and high instruments kind of growing, but the sub is not growing as fast. And it's the same for the climax. Like it starts quite warm feeling, but as you end up here, it's very busy around the harsh areas. So you end up with a track that's a little bit too harsh, in my opinion, and it's not quite blending as nicely. It's not quite as deep feeling as the beginning. So what I would make sure is that you have a bit more of a deep feel by making sure that the bass kind of grows as much as the high mids, and also making sure that the high mids don't grow to be that harsh. It's a bit too noisy, so you have to see what layers you're introducing here. No, in terms of dynamics as well, I think it's a little bit too flat, a little bit too crushed. So that's also what creates the high mid kind of noisiness. It's also the limiting, because that kind of reduces dynamics and reduces contrast. So it clutters as well. And too much limiting can also cause distortion, which creates this kind of cluttered feel in the high mids. So I'm sure that this is also part of it. So you can probably ease up the limiter as well on this. Now you have a bassline instrument, which sounds a bit too subby, and sounds like it's taking away power from the drums. I think it's like a synth bass, probably. So make sure that your basses in general shouldn't take too much low sub, like 40-50 Hz. Try to kind of keep that range for the drums, and have the bass be more dominant around 80 to 100, or a bit above, and make sure that it's not too kind of subby there, in the very low sub. Because sometimes it can be a bit muddy, it can be fighting too much for power with the drums, you know? You don't need that much mega sub to have a powerful bass line. It's more like the 80 to 100 range. But overall the EQs sound quite nice, I have to say. Like, it sounds quite balanced. So it's just that kind of that noisiness build up towards the end. That it completely changes the tone of the track. So just keep that range in check, in my opinion. But yeah, otherwise it sounds nice, mostly around the places that are not too loud. So it sounds the best, in my opinion, when it's not too busy. You have to be careful about the tonal balance when you build up more layers. But yeah, so that's about it, guys, for this one. Alright, let's check the next one. Hopefully I'm not gonna mess up the levels this time. We got Tyler Grow with Flying with the Dragons. Let's see. Let me just read the comments a bit. Yeah, Jaeger is alright. Actually, I like the vocals in it. Yeah. That's probably the synth then that was at the end, creating that harshness. Alright, guys. Okay, let's check out Flying with the Dragons. Okay. I'm gonna play around with the volume. That sounds pretty cool. There is lots of complex things going on. I like it. And actually it's quite nice in terms of mix as well. I think we can just talk about a few things. So the intro here is fine. Maybe just a tiny bit more reverb on the glockenspiel. But yeah, you could add that. So here I think that's where the problems kind of start. So I think the oboe, and I believe it's an oboe, is just a bit too dry, so it doesn't quite blend. It doesn't quite feel like it's in a hall. It feels like it's in a studio room. So make sure you add a bit more long reverb to the oboe. And the reverb could also help mask the legato transitions, which are not the best. So reverb will make it sound more realistic and also help kind of the legato blend better. So here the Woodwind Trails could be a bit less nasal. Just the Woodwind Trails. So here, it's a bit anticlimactic because you have before the climax here, you have some very sharp kind of trombone staccatos, I think. But then the trumpet staccatos that come right afterwards are just less bright. So I was expecting these really cutting staccatos, but it was just like tamer than the little trombone staccatos that come right before. So I would make sure that the feel is kind of similar there, so we're not too disappointed in terms of tonal contrast when the trumpets arrive. They should be at least as powerful as the kind of trombone staccatos leaning in, I think. And they're a bit nasal as well, so I think it would be about cutting there a bit and boosting the air here a bit on the trumpets just to make them really hype. Now you have a problem here writing one drum sample or like one. I think with the roll. Okay, so it's the roll right before the hits. There is some pretty severe comp filtering going on. So make sure you don't have like a delay going on, or you try to do a Haas effect but you put it in mono. There is something very wrong with this sample. It sounds like there is like you have the same exact waveform, just kind of slightly offset a few milliseconds, and it has that weird kind of ringy comp filtering kind of noise. I don't know if you know what it is, but like so when you have the same waveform very close in terms of timing and twice layered on top of each other, so say you have like the exact same sound very close to each other, only a few milliseconds, it can create this artifact of like this. It's called comp filtering, and it creates this very weird ringy filter, as if there was like a filter like that. That's why it's called comb filtering, because it looks like a comb. So you have this very weird kind of color in this roll. You know, it sounds like that a bit. I mean, okay, you know what I'm talking about now? Right, this weird kind of color. So make sure it's not like a delay issue. It could be also the fact that you put it twice, or maybe a routing issue. So you accidentally routed it to 2 different places and it happened at the same time, but it's only a few milliseconds apart. It could create this problem as well, but it's definitely there. So just try to figure out where it's coming from. It's only this kind of little rise. I think here the brass could be a bit brighter at the end. This part sounds a little bit too muffled, maybe. A little bit too mid-range centric, probably. So maybe try to open it up a bit around here. I like the bass here is great. The feeling, like the impact is great. So I think the melody, the woodwinds are a bit too loud here. Like the main melody is a bit too loud. I think it's like a flute or something. It's just kind of loud compared to the brass. Even here towards the end. And it's just a bit distracting to have this flute that's kind of really upfront and loud. And then you have this fortissimo brass that's almost like in the back. So I think the contrast is a bit too much. Maybe what you could do is like layer this melody with a trumpet, like a trumpet staccato or something, just turn it down and like maybe layer it with strings and brass. Maybe a violin could help the melody as well. But having the flute so loud compared to the brass that is playing very loud but is quiet in volume in comparison just feels a bit odd. And it also kind of bloats the mid-range as well a bit because the flute is so loud. And in terms of composition and harmony, I would say there is kind of a little bit too much unison in these phrases. So you could try to just kind of reconsider how you're writing the harmony. For example, you have the bass line here in unison with the lead, and sometimes it's nice, but I feel like it makes the track a little bit too much two-dimensional to have the too much kind of unison with the lead. So if you could try to build like a more of a harmony with like thirds, fifths, bass lines, you know, contrasting with the melody more, I think it could build a thicker kind of frame for the track. If you have too many instruments doing the same thing, you know, sometimes just piling a lot of instruments in the same note is not going to make the track sound really much bigger. So maybe you could see how you're doing the orchestration, and that will also make the track feel bigger as well if the orchestration is sort of more spread out in the harmony. But yeah, lots of cool things though. Alright guys, let's move on. We got... Oh, that's also a Cubase export. Because Pro Tools likes to split in dual mono. I swear, this is like the dumbest thing ever, but Pro Tools doesn't understand how to import stereo from Cubase. Okay, so aux... Let me just read the comments a bit. Oh, hey Everetic. Glad you like the review. Oh, Studio Woodwinds, yeah. But I mean, like, it's not a huge issue if you have a small sounding library. You just have to kind of fiddle with it to make it sound better. You have to put like if it's too narrow, you have to use a room reverb before the whole. You know, it's a bit trickier to make a small library sound big, but it's possible. Alright, let's listen to this track, guys. So by Samuel Morin, We Are Not Alone. Let's see. Good use of the Spitfire things. Spitfire things, yeah. New library name. Sounds very good, mix-wise and composition-wise. this one's going to be more simple because it's mostly Spitfire libraries. So, you know, it sounds quite good out of the box. I'm sure you did some EQ, but, you know, there is less kind of tricky traps to sort of beat when it comes to mixing Spitfire libraries, because in terms of mix, it's quite there already, because the recordings are just good. But I think we can talk about a few things. And also you did just a great job mixing, I guess. I'm not gonna put you down just because you use Spitfire libraries. Now in terms of mix, I think you could have a bit more sub, because you got some bass going on, but it's just kind of lacking a bit of support. Especially here in the first rise, for example. There is some rumble, right? But I'm just looking more for like... Like what I'm lacking is just deeper tonal bass. Just kind of some stronger tonal bass to support the mid-range. And I thought maybe the textures were just slightly too mid-rangey here. Like only like a dB, you know, but I like how warm it is though. So here you could probably cut a bit of rumble. Trade a bit of the rumble for more tonal low end. And like if you need to boost bass, try to boost more around like 80. Like there is no need to have so much of this super low, because it's not really audible and won't be felt by many people as well, unless they have really big speakers. So it's taking a lot of headroom as well. It's not too necessary to have that much super low rumble. You could boost more around here and, you know, cut around here, and you will feel the low boom even more, even though you cut all that 30 Hz. There is something that's a bit harsh here, and it feels quite different from the other instruments. I think it's some strings or woodwinds. Let's see. No, it's strings. So the strings staccatos here, they feel a bit too harsh compared to the rest of the textures in the track. Around 3K. So if you can find this layer and just cut it there so it blends better, I think it would be good. So here there is like a solo violin. This one feels a little bit dry for my taste. I like how detailed it is, but I would probably make it a bit wetter, so the solo in here. Also, throughout all this part here, pretty much everywhere, I would make sure there is a bit more tonal bass, so the double basses I would probably boost a bit. It sounds nice and warm, but it's a little bit too low mid focused. I think you can have a bit more bass support. This, you know what I mean? This low bass going on. Make sure it's consistent though, so what you can do to make sure it's kind of steady is you take your double bass patch and you put like a dynamic EQ on it like that. So it's like nice and steady and warm, just supporting the mid-range all the time. So here we got a bit of a problem of stereo field in my opinion. I think it's the vocals, or maybe it's the pad, the synth pad. There is something that's very wide. And it just feels a bit strange because it feels like a stereo enhancer. It feels like a stereo enhancer that was turned up to like 200%. And I think that's too much of a contrast compared to what's before. And that's fine sometimes to have extremely wide elements, but usually it's like in the background of something. So you're gonna have the main element that has a more realistic width, and you're gonna have like an extremely wide element in the back. But because this is just kind of extremely wide overall, it feels a bit out of phase. And feels a bit too out of phase. It sounds a bit strange. So I think I think you can sort of narrow a little bit. So it doesn't feel quite out of phase, or just don't widen as much would be ideal. It would probably blend better and feel more realistic. And usually this stuff is more audible on headphones. So if you have trouble really hearing the phase issues like that, sometimes it's more audible on headphones. Depends on your monitoring setup as well. It can be audible on monitors, but you know, when you have this very heavy decorrelation between the left and the right ear, that decorrelation will instantly kind of feel weird in your brain. You know, you're gonna feel like the sound is just whoa there, and that can be a sign that you did too much widening. Also, there was a timpani roll at some point. Yeah, I think you can, that timpani, you can kind of clean it a bit in the mids and boost it in the bass, so it's like adding some low support as well. You know, not just cluttering the mids when it's rolling, but also kind of boosting the sub under the rest of the track. So that timpani, you could, yeah. That way it just gives more room for the textures, all our 4 Arnald's textures. So yeah, that's about it, guys, for this one. Let's move on to the next one. So then we got a track by Alexei Rota-Korpi. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Gates of Elysian. Let's see. Very cool, very cool. I really love this intro. Oh, so I think this is a very nice track. Yeah, balance up. Okay. So I think this is a very nice track. In terms of composition, it really has like all the main elements to make a really solid, like super thick arrangement. So I think mostly it's just the mix. Some things are a bit lacking in the mix. It does sound quite nice, but there's a few things I think that kind of hold it back. And it's more mix-wise than composition-wise. Because composition-wise, it's very nice. So let's go just from the beginning. I think your low booms could be a bit more aggressive here. I mean, the low booms are a bit shy. And like here too, the low boom is just a bit shy. So I think here you have very high kind of ticking sound. This one could be very wide to kind of widen the track. So you could put the house effect on it. It's the perfect candidate to create the house effect. So again, just a few milliseconds on one channel on this ticking sound. And then you compensate for the effect. You just kind of widen the ticking sound this way. It could be very nice. Again, the low boom a bit shy. I think the bass line is a bit shy as well. I mean, the lead is quite strong, but the low bass line is just a bit weak in comparison to that lead. I think in just a couple dB, maybe a bit more mid-range, just so that it's a nice kind of pulsing bass line that you got. But I think it could be a bit more noticeable, you know. So I think the short strings, the short staccatos kind of lack air. They feel a bit kind of held back by the treble, you know? They feel like they're kind of peaking around here. And they're kind of lacking the openness. So feel free to just open up your staccatos a little bit in the treble. So this kind of swoosh here. I would just have it more treble heavy, more shiny, and less honky around 1K. So I think the main kind of impact here could be more punchy. So this is probably like a sample issue. It just doesn't feel like the main accents are very accented. It's kind of lacking a big punch hit that would clearly mark these accents, you know? It feels more like a swoosh, but it's lacking the bass punch. There's something in the background that feels a bit too stereo enhanced. I'm trying to figure out what it is. It's not easy though. I think it might be the low bram sort of sound. It's a bit too wide, but like feels a bit out of phase. The middle part sounds great. Your bass notes could be a bit louder. See this bass note, for example, just more bass notes. Louder, low piano notes. These hits feel a bit dry, like they're very bright, but they feel a bit too dry in my opinion. Again, the strings feel a bit too present around here. And feel a bit kind of held back by the lack of air in the short strings. There is more punch in this part in the low percussion, but still could have a little bit more clean punch, I think. The snare also is quite weak, so the low hits are pretty good, but the snare is quite weak. It sounds very sort of high mid focused, like it's like a ch, and it feels very mono as well. So I think you need a snare that has less just kind of 6K click and more of a low body and also low reverb, you know, so it's like a wide kind of reverby snare. I think it would fit the track more. A bit more like these Ivan Torrance snares, you know. So right now, I mean, actually, I bet that it sounds big in solo, but in the context of the mix, what you have mostly poking out is this. And that's just not enough. So you have to tweak it until, in the context of the mix, it sounds fatter. Because I'm sure, like, right now, if you solo it, it has a body. But it's just not enough body to actually carry the mix, you know, to actually feel big through the mix. Like a drum is always gonna feel different in the context of the mix compared to in solo. Because in solo it sounds very full, you hear all the frequencies, but in the mix, the only thing that you're gonna hear is what's not gonna be masked by the mix. And the other instruments are gonna be masking a lot of the drum tail and a lot of the frequencies of the drum. So usually if you have a drum that's like that has a lot of 6K, even though it's fat as well, in the context of the mix, you're just gonna hear that 6K, you know, if it has too much of that. Or the opposite could be happening too. Like if it's a very dark drum, I mean, it has some high end, but not much. Well, with frequency masking, with dynamics masking through the mix, you're only gonna feel what kind of pokes, which is the most dominant frequency, usually. So yeah. So, but overall, very nice track. I mean, the composition in particular really has pretty much all the elements to sound really, really fat. And it does sound fat. Just these few things are kind of holding it back, I think. Alright guys, then we got Sharma Yelverton. Oh, I need to convert this as well. Let's go. Okay, let's see. Okay, so this one, you know, the mix doesn't sound bad. Like, it doesn't sound bad at all. It's just like, let me balance out the volumes. Okay, so I think what's happening here is that it sounds a bit too raw. Like, it sounds like you didn't EQ too much, which, you know, it can prevent some big problems, because if you overprocess, it's also bad. But you could process a bit more to create more space. Like, for example, you got the brass that's a bit too present in the mids, just masking too much of the other instruments. So the brass is kind of dominating. So, I mean, I'm just gonna quote, like, I'm just gonna go over a few things that you could do quickly. Many moves could be done, but... So maybe a tiny bit more air in the strings and the brass, especially the brass actually. Then less low mids in the brass, less on the horns. So less 500 Hz on the horns. The trumpets less 2 to 3K. Sounds a bit harsh in the trumpets and the high brass in 2K. What else? A bit more low bass to kind of support everything. So... just to varying degrees some of this. Of course, that doesn't work on the whole mix, but you get the idea. Mostly the brass is the one masking the others. The strings here feel a bit harsh, around 2 to 3K as well. But you know, there is nothing really too crazy. Like, I mean, it's not too bad, you know. It's just a bit too raw. It's kind of the overall feeling I'm getting. Also, it's a bit loud here, so I feel like in this part it's artifacting a little bit. And now, if you clean up the mid-range, it's also gonna help the limiting, because usually it's kind of these loud horn harmonics, this kind of loud mid-range that is triggering your limiter. That's what's going on here. So you end up with a sound that's sort of being compressed a bit too much. And it kind of reacts and flutters a little bit into the limiter, and that can be a bit audible. But once you clean the sound, actually, it might be fine. But again, check the limiter, it's probably still gonna be a bit too much. So just kind of polishing, cutting a bit of the honkiness, cutting a bit of the low mids, just polishing the frequency response of the instruments, you know. I think that's mostly it for this track. The snare is a bit quiet probably here. Yeah, things like that. But I think the horns are probably the biggest culprit actually, because the horns are covering the most of the other instruments. But yeah. Alright. I think we are at... okay, so we got... By the way guys, I saw that in my email I have more tracks, so I will check them if I still have time. But I'm gonna check out the track that people sent first in order. But I mean, even if I don't check them, then I'm gonna check them next stream. So I'm gonna save them and check them next stream. All right. I don't know when I'm gonna do the next stream, but I will probably do another one at some point. Okay, so we got a track by Tony Crétet. And this one doesn't seem to have a name, so we're gonna check this one. Probably something that's not released yet. Thomas. Empire of Ember. Wait, you sent me something. Not Thomas, sorry. I mean Charles Westphal. Wait, I know you sent me something, but it's weird. I don't have you in the list, but I know I downloaded something like that. Can you just maybe resend it? Because I know you sent it yesterday. Because I don't see it here, it's weird. I hope I didn't accidentally delete it. Because I know you sent it a while ago. I think. Yeah, actually I have it. No, never mind. I have it here. I have it. Empire of Ember. Yeah, I'm just gonna put it in the list. I will check it out. Okay, it's in. All right. Yeah, let's talk about this one. So I think, Tony, you overprocessed many things. You overprocessed. You put too much treble in these instruments, so they feel a bit noisy, almost like there is white noise here in the treble. So I think you need to be careful with the treble boost, because it can make the orchestral instruments feel a bit too synthy and artificial when you boost too much treble. So it's always a balance of clarity and the tone. So you can't overly boost the tone, or it sounds, it sounds a bit too strange. Also, the reverb is very strange here. I think you need to be careful with how much reverb you put and what type of reverb you put, because the reverb sounds very much like it's in a box. So what I'm feeling is like kind of like it's in a room, a small-ish room, but it's very wet. So it almost feels like the instruments are sort of swimming in a medium room. So I think the first step would be to do less treble boosts and then try to stick to like a more normal whole reverb and just maybe not add as much. It does feel a bit too wet. And then it kind of creates kind of a, it feels like all the instruments are a bit too swimming into the reverb, and it kind of kills the clarity. So maybe what happened is that you put too much reverb, and then to sort of counter the loss of clarity of adding to that much reverb, you boosted more treble. So maybe you try to counter the loss of clarity of the reverb with more treble, but I think the solution here is just to process less, put less reverb, and then boost less highs. See, that's very harsh, so I would be careful with these highs. But yeah, it's kind of hard to go in detail right now, because I think if you change the reverb and the EQ, it's gonna change the mix drastically. So, everything will sound different, especially once the reverb is fixed. So yeah, just focus on tweaking the reverb, I would say, mainly. Okay, let's move on to the next track. So yeah, we're gonna do this track by Charles Westphal. Let's go. Nice. Yeah, lots of good things in this track, composition and mix-wise. Now let's talk about the EQ a little bit. I think the main issue is the low mids of the brass. So you didn't cut much low mids in the tuba and the trombones, I can hear that. And that's kind of taking a lot of room from the other instruments. So I think don't hesitate to do this to your tuba. Just your tuba and your trombones, bass trombones, and you will hear that the sound just opens up. Because right now this is kind of clouding a lot of the other elements a bit too much. And you won't really miss that low mid from this low brass, because you already have the horns which will have lots of these low mids, and just plenty of instruments will fill that range. Whereas the low brass is just kind of more there for the buzz when it's playing loud and kind of low support around 150 Hz and below. And you're still gonna have it, but this low mid range is not as useful in the low brass, and it's very, very, very loud by default usually. So you can cut it a bit. Oh no, one more thing, the percussion. The percussion feels a bit close-mic'd. So putting reverb on percussion is an option, but what always sounds the best is just using the natural mic positions. So somehow if you could maybe tweak the mic positions to get more of a natural room or decatory sound, it would probably blend better. Because you have like a big choir and kind of a big sound, but the percussion is just very close in your face. That can actually be seen by the transients as well. I mean, it's very tight and can be hard here. I mean, it's fine, but it's a bit too much of a contrast. Like, it sounds like you're 1 meter away from the hit. Very dry. So I think maybe the feel of the hits could blend a bit more, could be a bit more coherent with the track if you had a slightly more far away capture. Based on how big the brass sounds. Now the percussion is also a little bit muddy in the low mids, but it's more like around 200 maybe. Maybe like 250. Maybe see if you can just clean it up a little bit somewhere around here, because sometimes it's a little bit like quacky, I would say almost. Here. There. So yeah, cut the percussion a bit around here. The choir could maybe be a bit more audible. The long choir, not the short. But yeah, I mean, that percussion plus the brass is really what's cluttering this range. Like, all the percussion and the low brass here is what's kind of, you know, monopolizing this range. If you cut that, the mix will already sound a lot more open, I think. Violin, solo violin, maybe a bit too mono-ish. You could maybe make it sound a bit bigger. You could make it sound a bit bigger with the doubler trick. So this doubler. Or like a subtle early reflection. I mean, it's kind of the same idea. Maybe just put that before you send the violin to the hall, just to give a bit more size. I think the percussion could probably be a bit more compressed. Now, if you change the mic positions, it won't need as much compression. If you leave the mic positions this way, you can compress more because this has fairly punchy transients, fairly kind of close sounds. So compressing could sort of big end like the sound by adding more decay to the tail as well, as just a more kind of reverb feel. Because the thing is, if you compress a drum that sounds like this, you're sort of gonna raise the low level parts of the drum, so you're gonna raise all the tails and the reverb that's kind of lingering between the hits. So you could compress these hits to sort of get more consistency in the punch, as well as more reverb in the tails. Or you could just boost the tail and then not compress as much. Boost the far mics, and then you wouldn't compress as much because you would already have a more kind of Hans Zimmer percussion library sound, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I'm just lacking some slight depth from the percussion. That's mostly it. It sounds nice though. Nice one. Okay. Let's load the next one. Yeah, I think, yeah, Chris Mayers. Okay. The sad scientist. Oh, I know Chris Mayers. I know this is gonna sound hype, most likely. Let's see. Let me just read the comments for a second. Yeah, exactly, Everetic, I agree. The mix is a bit dark for this type of composition. And the thing is, when you have a really dark mix like that, like you can have a dark frequency response, but dark doesn't necessarily mean like dark. What I mean by dark is like dark can just be not having too much high treble, but then the bass and the mids still need to be kind of flat. Because if you have like a big bump around 200, 300, 400, then it doesn't sound dark. It just sounds like there is one specific spot in the frequency response clouding the rest. But if it's kind of linear from 40 Hz to 2K, that could be a dark mix as well. But it would feel balanced because the mid would be balanced. Within the mid it would be balanced, and the bass in relation to the mids would also feel balanced. Okay, let's see this one. This is great. I knew it. Right. Chris is very good. Okay. Composition is great. The mix also is great, but I think we can talk about a few details in the mix. So I love the treble on the sharp violin part, the staccato part, because, you know, it's a fast defined part. It can be a little bit hyped in the treble like that. Even though it's quite a lot. I mean, maybe actually, you know what? Okay, maybe on this fast violin part, I would just ever so slightly tame it. Just because it's a bit noisy. So maybe just do this on the fast staccato part. Now on the long, on the legato violin part, I think the legatos don't sound as good when they're very, very airy. So I think the legato part, you could remove some of the highs here. Because very buzzy, noisy legato parts don't sound quite as emotional. So don't hesitate to have the legato part just not quite as hyped in the highs. So maybe like 3 dB less highs in the legato compared to the staccato, just so that it feels a bit more lyrical and you don't have this kind of buzzy kind of bass coming when the violin is pushing a bit for the legato violin part. Now the pizzicato bass is a little bit muddy around here. So maybe you could try to shape the bass a little bit like that. Just so it's a bit less muddy. Also, it feels a bit too wide, like it's almost a bit unfocused, so maybe you could pan it slightly more right, like 10% more right. No, actually, no, don't. Just maybe cut a bit of side signal in the bass, because it's a bit wide. Okay, we don't need so much side signal in the bass, so maybe just, it might be because you have a lot of reverb on them, maybe just do this. Yeah. It should refocus the bass a little bit more, so a bit of side cut like that, and a bit less 200 because this one is particularly resonant. So that could be your bass EQ. That could be it. And then let's keep going. So if you guys don't know, side signal is essentially the information that's different in both speakers. So it's only the stereo content. So it's only the information that's different in the left and the right. That's why it sounds very, very wide out of phase, because it's just like, you know, the side signal is only what's different. And the mid signal is only what's similar in both ears, in both channels. So it's like the mono signal essentially. Mid is mono, and the wide is like stereo. Side is like the stereo, it's like a stereo signal minus the mono information. So it's only what's left that's different. So here, this growl here in the brass is a little bit too muddy around here. So you could cut a bit. You might have a bit too much reverb overall in this track because it gets a bit confused sometimes. So maybe just turn down the reverb on all the instruments a little bit. Especially the lower instruments. So the cello line here is a little bit cluttered feeling. I think you can cut the cello line a bit around here. And around here too. Just make the cello a bit more aggressive, you know, a bit less noisy around 2K, a bit less honky around 700, and a bit more cutting, because it feels a little bit like it doesn't quite belong with the rest of the other instruments in terms of frequency response. It feels like it's kind of left raw, whereas the other instruments feel a bit hyped. I don't mind the reverb on the woodwinds, actually it's quite nice, but maybe a tiny bit too much. The ending sounds perfect, sounds great. I thought maybe this final hit could be wetter though. Maybe just more reverb on this clack, the kind of higher frequency part. Potentially. But yeah, this is very, very, very cool track, and the composition is just killer, so very nice job. Okay. Alright guys, let's move on to Also Levi Mihu. I hope I'm saying your name right. Alright, let's see. Guys, I'm gonna keep going for like 15 more minutes and then I will stop. So whatever tracks I have not reviewed, I will keep for next time, as well as the tracks that I was sent by email during this stream. So yeah. Wow, good composition. Yeah, the composition is excellent. So I think it's one of these cases where the mix is also bringing down the composition a bit, in my opinion. So let's turn down actually the track a bit. So I think, yeah, the mix is definitely the weaker part here. Now, there's a few issues. The main issue is just the stereo field. It sounds stereo enhanced. I don't know what you put on the master, or if it's like the libraries, but it just doesn't sound quite focused. It sounds a little bit too wide. It could also be the reverb that you use, but like it sounds like the mix was just kind of stereo enhanced, which puts it in sort of a weird box, a bit too much. So I would be careful with stereo widening tools. Now, in terms of the EQs, there is also a bit of work to be done. You probably over EQ'd in some way certain things. I feel like there is lots of muddiness building around 400 Hz in all the kind of mid strings, mid to low mid strings. And all of this range is just kind of taking power away from the bass, and it's taking warmth away from the bass and kind of adding too much honk. So now the too much honkiness dominates the tone. I would be careful with these frequencies. At the levels, the balance is quite good actually. Maybe the basses could be a tiny bit louder in terms of volume. But that's probably only because these low mids are dominating, otherwise the basses are probably fine. So I think here the harps are a bit too EQ'd. The harps don't need to be that harsh here in the high mids. You can probably maybe try to tame the dynamics or just the EQ if you have a boost here. They probably don't need this. It sounds a bit harsh when it peaks around here. But I think the second time around it's not that harsh. It's just this one glissando. Now the choir is a little bit harsher in the high mids. There's kind of a noisiness building up here, so the tone would probably be a bit nicer if you cut a bit around here. Also, it might be the strings. So try to check out this 3-4K range. Actually, yeah, the balance is good. Like the balance of the basses is, the balance of all the instruments is good. It's mostly just EQ and reverb here that are wrong. I mean, wrong. That's a big word, but could be improved. Let's say sounds better. The reverb just doesn't feel quite natural. It feels like it's containing the mix too much. The stereo enhancing and reverb. You know, it could be the reverb, it could be a stereo enhancer. Actually, let me see if you wrote a comment. No, not yet. But yeah, just try to see what you're doing with the space here, because it, like, I'm sure if you actually did less to the space, it wouldn't sound as processed as this. You probably you might be overthinking the stereo field, because usually it's just like a bit of panning, a bit of reverb, and you get the sound, you know. I mean, of course you can use tricks to get the stereo field a bit better, but I mean the gist of it is just panning and reverb, so don't overthink the stereo field too much. You can do more harm than good with that. And yeah, the EQ I talked about could definitely, I think, make the track a bit more smooth feeling. But the composition is just top notch, so very, very nice job with this track. Okay guys, let's see. I mean, yeah, the voicing, the movement in the strings was just wow. Really nice. Eric Tynan with Uprising. Let's convert it. Yeah, maybe the stereo. I mean, depends what you mean by tiny bit. Like, because usually 10% of stereo enhancement is already too much. You know, it depends on the stereo enhancer as well. Okay, let's check out this track. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I think two things are going on here. I mean, two main things. The first one is that the dynamic range is too much. It's just too much. So, like the very loudest part of the track and the outro are just too different in terms of volume. So I would be careful with that. Check out maybe in the composition you're doing too much volume automation. You shouldn't have that much dynamic range if you mostly just use the CC1 or the natural dynamics of the libraries. So just maybe check out what's going on here. It could also be that the elements you're introducing in the build-up are just too loud compared to the other elements, like the strings. But yeah, and also I think there is lots of big low mids and bass that are kind of cluttering the track too much. So like anywhere from like 100 Hz or like 50 Hz to 200 to 300 almost. Like the percussion is just taking too much room, it's too rumbly, and also like any kind of low sustain instruments are just taking too much room here and just masking everything else. You know, it's just too loud compared to the violins, for example, and that's kind of unbalancing the track. And it's also causing another problem, and that's that you're kind of pushing the track too much into the limiter. It's even distorting at one point. It's distorting around this part here on the hits. That means you're probably doing like 4 dB of limiting or something, which is a bit too much. But the reason it's also struggling to kind of stay clean within the limiter is the frequency response. So once you clean these big low mids and you clean that bass a little bit, then it's going to be more easy to push the track, because the reason it's distorting is mainly because you're trying to push all that bass into the limiter. And the limiters don't like bass. They're going to distort very audibly when you push too much bass. So if you can clean a bit the frequency response and you know, just take care of that. It also feels a bit too wide here in the low mids, so let's see maybe what's going on here. There is one instrument that's too wide, like there's too much side signal, too much stereo enhancer almost. So if I was to master this, this is what I would do. See, so you really have to kind of get rid of that unfocused bass, overly wide bass, and also reduce the amount overall. And also I heard that at the ending here, the trumpets are a little bit too harsh. But that distortion kind of in the highs of the trumpets could also be the fact that there is too much limiting. So taming that will definitely help. But yeah, I like the track overall though. Good build up. Just watch out for the dynamic range as well. You know, if the outro is if the climax is super loud and the outro is super quiet, it can be troublesome when it comes to listening to the track, because people then would have to adjust the volume a lot during the track, and that's just a bit too much. It's very dramatic here, the volume difference. Okay. You know what, guys, let's do one or two more, and then I'm gonna stop. So then we got, is this Blue Mountain score? Yeah, it's Blue Mountain score. Carried by the Wind. Let's see. Sounds quite realistic overall, yeah. Sounds good. You know what, I think the balance is actually very good in this one, the volume balance, and the MIDI programming is good as well. But I think the only thing really bothering me is the overall tonal balance of the track. And the woodwinds are a little bit too honky in the mids. just everything is just kind of pushing a bit too much low mid, and you know, so it's really kind of an overall feedback that I have here. Just to kind of clean the frequency a little bit, the frequencies. So this area here from like 1.5 to 3K on the woodwinds and the strings. And then the bass is a bit covered by the low mids a bit too much. So having that bass kind of be a bit more solid under the low mids. Let's see how this sounds like. With a bit of Gulf Coast as well. Okay, see the difference? Let's see. See, this is what I'm talking about here. Probably left a bit too raw. Everything was left a bit too raw. Yeah. Okay, yeah, very little EQ, that explains. So what you can probably do is try to just kind of tame some of these frequencies in the different instruments. So the winds around 1.5K, the strings around 500-600, you know, all that honkiness. Make sure the bass is quite solid and warm in the sub so that it doesn't get dominated by 200-300. And that way you kind of get a more solid, flatter frequency response. And that would probably sound a bit more polished this way. But your levels are good though, so there is not much to say about the levels. And the orchestration is good. So yeah, just try to polish these EQs a little bit. And that would probably, you know, make the track feel a bit more mixed. Feels a little bit unmixed. That's about it. But feels natural and realistic. That's for sure. So yeah. Right, let's just do you know what, guys, since that's the list that people sent me before the stream, so I'm gonna finish it, and then whatever was sent during the stream I will do next stream. That's what I'm gonna do. What I'm gonna do is that I will save the emails of the people who sent me the tracks for this stream. The tracks that I couldn't listen to, and I will email you before the next stream when I do it, just to make sure that you still want me to review this one track. So that's what I'm gonna do. Wait, I forgot to convert. Okay. Ostinato. there's the one before the last one. I'm gonna review this one and then one more. Okay, so for this one, nice composition, nice ideas. There's just a few key things in the composition that I think are preventing the mix to be as good as it could be, and a few things in just purely mix based as well. So I think the panning is a bit too much. The panning kind of dislocates the instruments a bit too much, makes the cello feel too isolated on the right, and you probably went a bit too far with the spreading. It feels a bit disjointed. A way to, if you want to keep this kind of hard panning, a way to bring back a nice stereo field is the doubler trick. So again, check out the strings bass depth trick in my YouTube channel, because this kind of creates an echo on the opposite side. So it creates some kind of opposite reflections, which makes the panning feel less dramatic. So listen. As well as adding room, it does two things. It adds room and it reduces the effects of the panning because it creates these opposite reflections. So you could use that to some degree, but you should also probably pan a bit less. Now, in terms of bass, well, we're really lacking a tonal bass element. It seems like you kind of replace the double basses by this syncopated stabby synth. And the thing is, this synth is just so stabby that it doesn't really carry any tone. It's very much percussive. And so the low end feels a bit weak tonally because it feels like you just have violas and nothing below the violas really, or like a cello, but it's not very bassy. And it feels like the low end is very much deprived of a big tonal bass that would sort of carry the whole track, carry the leads and everything. Even in the main part, it sounds too vocal focused, too mid-range focused, and it lacks this big bass line. And like the syncopated synth cannot replace a tonal bass. So make them live together. They can live together just fine because it's very different. Like a percussive synth, it's going to be very different from a bass. So don't worry about layering them. And add some growl here, like some low brass, some tuba, some bass trombone. Actually, there is some trombones it seems, but they're just very recessed in comparison to the vocals. And I can't hear any tuba. Maybe there is a tuba, but it's way too weak in my opinion. It doesn't really carry the bass. And the vocals, you could cut them as well a bit in the mids because they are taking a lot of space. So around 500 to 1K, you could control the vocals a bit. But yeah, make sure these tubas are actually there. I mean tonally, because right now it's just mostly percussion. And that will help the track feel a lot bigger once this bass line cuts. And here the strings feel a bit close on the left violin. It also feels close because of the panning. The panning makes the violin feel very isolated again. So the doubler trick could help. Because when something is very panned, it also feels closer as a result. Oh shit! Oh wow! I just blew my ears. Yeah, guys, be careful because this knob goes up to 40. Sorry for the ear rape. Okay. Alright, let's move on to the last one. Well, that definitely woke me up at least. Whoa. Okay, so we got David Gomez Comino with El Sansopar. Let's see what this is. This is the last one for today, guys. two things mainly. So it sounds nice, and you know, not every track needs bass. So don't think I'm just gonna tell you to crank the bass, because no. I mean, this is like a nice texture, mid-range texture. Now, I think two things could be done here. First, the cello. The cello, I think it's a little bit on the dark side, and it sort of blends with the rest of the textures, but it could probably be a bit more sizzly. Not too sizzly, but just so it cuts a bit more and feels a bit more like it's separate from the texture. Because right now it just sort of blends with the rest, which is fine, but it could maybe have a bit more air, you know? Now, the textures, I don't mind the fact that there is not much low end, but I think that it would sound better with a bit more flatness in the frequency response. There is particular harmonics, which are just resonating a bit too much. So if you could cut these harmonics, it would probably blend a bit better. So let's just try to find them.